Hey guys, tonight we're heading back, way back, to the 1600s. You're standing in a clearing that smells like damp bark, soot, and freshly tilled dirt. There's a sea of green in every direction. Trees, yes, but not the kind you're used to. These are young, sparse, struggling to survive in unfamiliar soil. Your boot sinks slightly as you take a step forward. Somewhere behind you, the last creaking groan of a ship vanishes into the foggy distance. And in your pocket, a pouch full of apple seeds. You're here because someone told you the new world was full of opportunity. They didn't mention the endless mud, the biting cold, or the fact that everything edible either runs away or tries to kill you. But you're here. And so are those seeds. Little brown promises, shaped like teardrops, quietly whispering you've got a chance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're tuning in from, and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You bend down, clearing a patch of earth with the edge of your sleeve. It's not ideal soil. Rocky, too acidic. But you drop a few seeds anyway, the way one drops tiny prayers when no one is watching. This was no modern farm with irrigation and spreadsheets. It was stubborn trial and error, mostly error. Apples weren't native to this land. The crab apple was, but nobody in their right mind built an orchard out of crab apples. Too sour, too small, too much like biting into a lemon that resents you. What you had were old world apples. Domestic, Swedish, and familiar. Seeds brought over in stitched pouches or hidden inside sailors' pockets, even tucked into waistbands like talismans. No two seeds grow into the same tree, of course. Something early settlers learned after biting into what they thought would be a nice Jonathan, and got a sour fist of disappointment. Historians still argue whether these early planting efforts were methodical or just desperate. Probably both. You didn't plant an orchard expecting perfect gala apples. You planted because your neighbor had dysentery, the winters were long, and fermented fruit could double as both a tonic and a temporary escape. You build a fence around the planting, not because you're sentimental, but because the deer are. They adore young saplings, chewing them with the same glazed enthusiasm as modern toddlers with Play-Doh. The seasons turn. Trees grow slowly like old men waking up from naps. In the meantime, you make do. The New World's wild food isn't exactly friendly. Sure, there are berries, roots, fish, but none of it tastes like home. And that's what the apple really was, wasn't it? A portable piece of home. Something that tasted like afternoons instead of anxiety. Something sweet instead of all this bitter. You and your neighbor start planting more. Some trees survive, others wither. One just falls over in a storm with the tragic timing of a Shakespeare character. Still, the trees that live, live. By the time your back aches and your beard's gone gray, you've got fruit. Small, gnarled. Not the type that would win any prizes. But it's edible. And more importantly, it can be turned into cider. That's when you start seeing barrels. Lots of them. Sloshing, wooden, and perpetually slightly sticky. The sweet smell of fermenting apples hangs around you like perfume. Or punishment. Depends who you ask. Funny thing about apples, they don't grow true to seed. Each seed is a genetic wild card. That meant colonial apples were unpredictable, which is another way of saying often terrible. So people didn't eat them fresh, they drank them. Cider became the national beverage by default, not design. You watch as more orchards go up. Each one a silent act of optimism. Planting a tree is always a statement that you believe in the future, even when the present smells like wet wool and burning wood. One morning, a neighbor stops by. He's pale, thin, says he's been feeling low. You don't ask what that means. Nobody does. Not out loud. Instead, you hand him a jug. Say something like, "This'll warm your chest." And maybe it will, maybe it won't. But it's what you have. And sometimes offering someone sweetness is the closest thing to kindness that exists out here. You watch the sun rise over your orchard, half misted in dawn fog. The trees stand crooked like old soldiers at ease. A breeze rattles the leaves, and for a second it sounds like laughter. Or maybe it's just your tired ears. Either way, you stay a little longer under that tree. Just until the warmth hits your back. Just until you feel like staying. You're standing in the same clearing, though a decade has passed since your first muddy planting. The air feels softer now, edged with the tart scent of ripening fruit. There's a low hum coming from the trees, a mix of bees, wind, and the quiet satisfaction of growth. The apple trees have taken root, not just physically, but culturally. They're no longer foreign intruders, they're part of the land now. And so are you. You've traded calluses for muscle memory. You know when to prune, when to hope, and when to simply let the trees do what they were born to do. By now, every homestead worth its salt has at least a few apple trees. Some grow them in neat rows. Others let them wander the edges of fields like friendly ghosts. They don't just produce fruit, they mark time. When the blossoms appear, you know spring's real. When the apples drop, you know you've survived another summer. Even if just barely. There's no such thing as a perfect apple. Each one is its own weird little experiment. Some are mealy, others are so sharp they feel like insults. But every once in a while you bite into one that stops you. It's crisp, cold, sweet. You don't say anything. You just chew slowly as if gratitude can be absorbed through the teeth. Still, fresh apples remain a bit of a gamble, so most folks skip the risk and go straight for the barrel. Cider is the apple's afterlife. Pressed, fermented, and stored in jugs lined up like soldiers in the pantry. You drink it with breakfast, with dinner, with your neighbor, when she comes over looking like the winter got too long again. Even the kids get a sip. Small ones, of course. Water isn't always safe, after all, but cider? Cider is trustworthy. Cider is steady. And it's everywhere. You lug barrels to town, to barn dances, to weddings that start happy and end with someone snoring in a chair. It becomes currency in some places. Traded for nails, chickens, even medical services. Got a toothache? The blacksmith jokes. Drink more cider. Either it'll go away or you won't care anymore. Historians still debate whether cider was truly medicinal or just the only mildly safe beverage available. But the results speak for themselves. People drank it like it meant something. Because maybe it did. The trees, meanwhile, keep growing. Some are tall and gnarled with bark like an old man's knuckles. Others stay squat and dense, hiding their fruit like secrets. You learn to read them the way others read Bibles, looking for signs, watching for change, praying during dry spells. Your tools hang in the shed like sleeping animals. Rusted a little, worn in the right places. The apple press creaks, sighs, and releases its golden juice like a confession. You catch it in jugs. The smell is heady, like autumn wrapped in warm flannel and slightly bad decisions. A preacher visits one afternoon. He stands near your orchard and says, "God's miracles are quiet things." You don't disagree. Not out loud, because you've seen how a single blossom can survive frost. How one tree ignored all season gives fruit sweeter than all the rest. That feels like a miracle, or at least a good joke. Sometimes you sit out there with no agenda, just watching. The way the sun filters through the leaves, the way birds flirt from branch to branch. You sip cider from a tin cup and let the warmth settle in your bones. It doesn't fix anything, not really, but it helps you stay still. And in a life this loud with hardship, stillness can feel revolutionary. You remember planting your first seed. You remember the doubt, the mud, the way your boots squelched with every step. Now you walk through rows of trees and feel something close to pride. Or peace. Or maybe just the quiet sense that you were right to try. A neighbor passes by carrying a bundle of apples in her apron. For the sadness, she says softly. She doesn't explain. She doesn't have to. You nod and offer her a cup from your jug. She stays a while. You realize this is how healing looks out here. Not grand, not loud, just shared cider and soft words under the trees. You wake up before the sun, because the sun has never had much say in when cider needs pressing. The air smells like mashed fruit and damp wood. Sticky sweet, but not unpleasant. More like autumn's breath, warm and slow. You can already hear the clatter of jugs being rinsed, the shuffle of boots dragging across wet straw. Cider season is here. Again. Everyone's orchard is in full swing. Trees heavy with apples lean like they're exhausted from the weight of it all. You pick a few at random. Some have freckles. Others blush red like they've been keeping secrets. You fill your baskets and haul them toward the press with that familiar mix of ache and anticipation. This now is where things get busy. Apples are chopped, crushed, ground into a pulpy mess. That mess is wrapped in cloths and stacked under slabs of wood. Then the pressing begins. Slow, rhythmic, wood groaning, juice trickling down like it's afraid of being noticed. You collect the cider in barrels, each one smells a little different. Some are tart, some buttery, some with just the faintest whisper of wild yeast doing its chaotic magic. And you just know, that none of it will go to waste. Not here. Cider isn't a luxury, it's a utility. You use it for thirst, for trade, for just one more story around the fire. But more than anything, you use it to soften the world's edges. There's a local saying now, apple cider keeps the heart from drowning. No one really remembers who said it first, but it spreads like moss. People start repeating it when the days get shorter, when the fields turn brown and the air gets that sharp, silent bite. You say it to yourself sometimes too, under your breath, when things feel a bit too heavy, as if the cider really does carry some sort of emotional glue. Historians still argue whether colonial Americans actually believed cider had medicinal powers or whether it was just a case of hard living plus good marketing. But you're living the answer. It's not about what science says, it's about what the cider does, how it slows time, how it warms your insides just enough to get through the evening. You watch as even children carry small mugs. Not enough to tip them sideways, just enough to keep them quiet during the long sermons. Some people raise eyebrows, but water makes people sick more often than cider does. So you make peace with the tiny sips and sticky fingers. One doctor comes through town and claims cider can calm the nerves, warm the blood, and soothe the bile. You're not sure what bile has to do with your neighbor crying into her knitting last Thursday, but still, you pour her a cup the next time she comes by. You notice the cider talk gets louder during the winter. When the sun sets like it's trying to disappear, and the firewood doesn't last quite long enough. You huddle under quilts, sip from your jug, and talk about next spring's blossoms as if they've already arrived. That's what cider does. It tricks you gently toward optimism. You visit another farm, help with their pressing. Their apples are different. Rounder, greener, more stubborn. The juice is sharper. They say it wakes you up better than coffee. You nod and pretend to agree even though you've never had coffee. No one has, really. Not in these parts. You haul a barrel back home, balancing it in a creaky cart. Along the way, a neighbor stops you. His face is red from cold or cider. You can't tell. He just says, "Pour me a little." For the ache. And you do, because everyone aches a bit out here. Your own aches come and go, sometimes in your back, sometimes behind your eyes. But always the cider waits. Not like a cure, but like a friend who doesn't need to talk. Just sit, sip, be. Even the town meetings are less chaotic when cider's involved. Arguments about fences and pigs fade quicker. Voices soften. Disputes resolve not with shouting, but with refills. You begin to think the cider knows what it's doing. One night, you sit on your porch, a cup of the cloudy gold in hand. A breeze rustles the orchard. You listen for the sound of apples falling, soft and final. Like punctuation, one drops nearby. You don't even flinch. Let it fall, you murmur. Let it all fall? You run your fingers over the rim of the cider mug, tracing the faint notch left from the time it cracked in the frost. It still holds liquid, and that's enough. That's kind of how everything works around here. As long as it still holds, it stays. You're sitting near the hearth, legs stretched toward the warmth, watching the soft dance of flames behind the grate. The cider in your cup is warm this time, not hot, just enough to send lazy curls of steam upward. You take a sip and breathe in. There's a faint bitterness beneath the sweetness today. You wonder what that means. This is where you begin to notice it. The shift. The way people choose cider instead of ale. Not just because it's easier to make or safer, but because it feels gentler. Less harsh, more home. You watch as neighbors, stout farmers, solemn preachers, even giggling children, start to build their lives around orchards and barrels. Ale is rougher, brewed with urgency, meant for crowded taverns and loud voices. Cider, on the other hand, belongs to porches and soft songs and staring into fields. You'd say it feels more honest if that weren't such a dramatic word for a fermented fruit drink. The morning markets start to reflect this shift too. Barrels of cider lined up alongside apples, vinegar, and the occasional jar of mystery jam. One woman even starts calling herself an apple apothecary. She offers mixtures of cider, honey, and herbs in little clay bottles. For the heart, she tells you. You believe her a little. Historians still debate whether this transition from ale to cider was deliberate or practical, whether it was a question of taste or just what the land could provide. But for you, the answer's in the rhythm of things. Ale is for nights you forget. Cider is for nights you want to remember slowly. There's a small boy who runs up to you every time you bring cider to the village. Is this the sweet kind or the stinging kind? He asks. You always pretend to check. Then you wink and hand him the tiniest sip. He giggles every time. One night the Reverend stands before his tiny congregation, his Bible trembling slightly in his hands. He talks about despair, about that creeping dark that swallows the spirit. No one says the word sadness. They don't need to. You can feel it hovering behind his words, like mist in the rafters. Afterward, you pour cider into cups. People drink quietly. It's not a solution, but it's something, a kind of pause. You make eye contact with the Reverend. He raises his cup slightly. Just enough to say I know. You walk back home under a moon that feels heavier than usual. Like it knows too much. You sip cider and think about how different it is from ale, how it lingers in the throat, how it doesn't numb, it softens. Makes the ache less sharp, less demanding. It doesn't drown the sadness, not really. But it lets you carry it differently. Like wet wool instead of iron. You remember stories of how colonists sometimes gave cider to the sick, the grieving, even the newly widowed. Helps the nerves, they'd say. You suspect it was also an excuse to sit together in silence. To let the grief exist without having to fix it. Just hold a mug between your palms and breathe. A doctor comes through town again, this one in better boots. He carries papers, talks about humors, balances, and mysterious vapors of the mind. He recommends a spoonful of apple cider vinegar at dawn. For the melancholy, he adds, nodding solemnly. You try it. It burns a little. Then again, so does life. One afternoon you watch the children run between the orchard rows, laughing so loudly it startles the crows. A girl stops, breathless, and says, "The trees look like they're smiling." You smile too and wonder what she sees that you no longer do. You take a sip from your flask and lean against the old fence post. Somewhere in the distance, someone starts humming an old tune. The kind with no real words, just rhythm. You hum along, cider warming your chest, and for a moment, just a moment, you forget the weight of the world. You don't remember when the sadness started. Not just yours, the town's. It was like fog, creeping in quiet, pressing low against the chest. No one called it by name. They didn't have one. No diagnoses, no letters from doctors explaining it away. Just weariness, silence, a long stare out a window with no particular reason. Some blamed the winter, others the long days without sunlight, or the short ones that ended too fast. You heard whispers that the soil wasn't right, that the air held something old and brooding. But mostly, people just stopped talking about it. Except with you, because you had cider. Neighbors come by with reasons that make no sense. They want to check the fence, borrow a ladle, or look at that tree again. But really, they want to sit. Maybe talk. Maybe not. You hand them a warm mug, and the cider does what words can't. It makes room. You notice their shoulders loosen, their eyes soften. They lean back, just enough to suggest that maybe today won't swallow them whole. You felt that same relief yourself. Countless nights when you sat by the hearth, holding a warm drink like it was a rope tied to something solid. There's a boy who never speaks. Not more than a few words, anyway. But one day, after you hand him a slice of dried apple, he says, "It makes my chest not feel like rocks." Then he leaves. You don't need more than that. Historians still argue whether colonial Americans understood melancholy as mental illness or just a spiritual slump. Probably both. But out here, it's simpler. You know when someone's weighed down. You see it in the way they stare at their hands or linger by the orchard fence long after the sun's gone. You also know when cider helps. You watch it happen. A slow thawing, the kind that doesn't look like healing, but tastes a little like it. You remember one woman who kept to herself for months after her husband passed? Never wept in public, never left the house. Then one morning she stood beneath your trees, said nothing, just stood there, hands clasped. You brought her cider without asking, she drank, and then she stayed. For a while. Some days you think the trees absorb the sadness, that maybe their roots drink it in and turn it into something sweeter. Not joy exactly, just something easier to carry. You walk the orchard rows with your palms grazing the bark. Whisper to them like old friends. The apple trees don't speak back, not with words. But when the breeze moves through the leaves just right, when the branches creak like a sigh, you feel understood. Like the trees have seen it too. The losses, the long winters, the quiet ache behind people's smiles. Your cider press has taken on new meaning. It's not just a tool now, it's a kind of altar. A place where sadness is acknowledged, fermented, and poured into something warm. You still use herbs sometimes. Chamomile, lemon balm, a touch of cinnamon. Just enough to say, I thought about you when I made this. You wonder if the sadness will ever go away. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe it's not about chasing it off. Maybe it's about learning how to sit with it. How to invite it in without letting it take over the whole room. One night, as you rock gently on your porch, you sip slowly and watch the stars blur through your lashes. There's peace in the slowness. Peace in admitting that not every ache needs fixing. Some just need warmth and time. You start to hear strange things in the village. Not gossip exactly. More like folktales dressed in borrowed science. Whispers that certain apples are good for sadness, others for headaches, and one particular variety that supposedly makes you dream of people you've lost. You raise an eyebrow, but you keep listening. Some of these tales come from women who've been here longer than the fences. Old hands with knotty fingers and eyes that see past skin. They say things like, you plant this tree facing east so it drinks the first light. That's what keeps the dark thoughts away. You don't argue. You take notes. There's one woman, Eliza, who makes poultices from apple peel, vinegar, and rosewater. For the spirit, she says with a shrug. You help her press them into soft linen, wrap them around the wrists of a neighbor who hasn't left her house in 3 days. The woman doesn't speak when you place them on her, but she lets you. That's enough. The idea that apples can heal isn't new. In the old world, apples were tangled in mythology, medicine, and metaphors. Here in the colonies, those stories have taken root in fresh soil. The trees become more than food. They become quiet companions in the rituals of survival. You walk past a home with dried apple slices strung like garlands around the windows. Keeps the gloom out, they tell you. Or at least gives it something else to chew on. You smile and keep walking. Historians still argue whether these folk practices were spiritual, medicinal, or just desperate improvisation. But you've seen enough to believe that sometimes belief is medicine enough. If it brings people comfort, who's to say it doesn't work? You start a little book, nothing grand, just a thin journal made of scrap paper and twine. In it, you jot down things people say. Boil the bark if the night is heavy. Eat the first apple of spring before anyone else does. Don't speak to the tree you prune. It remembers. Each entry is written with a faint smile, not mocking, just mused by how much you want these things to be true. You experiment too. One cold week, you soak apple slices in lavender and tuck them into cloth sachets. You give them to neighbors with gentle instructions. Place it near your bed. One man returns a week later. My wife didn't cry last night, he says, eyes red. Not once. You give him another sachet. Some people start calling you the orchard whisperer. You roll your eyes, but a part of you likes it. Not the title, the connection. The sense that maybe what you're doing is more than pressing fruit. One girl insists that the apples on the tallest tree in your grove taste different when she's sad. More mellow, she explains. You make a note in your book. Sorrow equals sweeter taste. You pass a house with apples drying on the roof, soaking in sun like sleeping cats. The family inside hasn't spoken much since the baby passed, but every day someone climbs the ladder to turn the slices. That's all. No conversation, just slow, careful movement. You think about leaving them a jug. You do. They don't thank you, but they keep the jug. There's a rhythm to it now. The growing, the harvesting, the pressing, the sharing. You become less of a cider maker and more of a quiet caretaker. Not just of the orchard, but of the invisible weight that drapes over the village in late November. Your trees seem to understand. They drop their apples at just the right moment. Never too soon, never too late. Like they're listening, and maybe they are. You sip from your mug and feel the steam curl against your cheek. Somewhere behind you, an owl hoots once. The wind nudges the trees and the branches move like old friends shifting in their sleep. The orchard rests, and so, for the first time in days you wake with the scent of vinegar in the air. Not the sharp, nose-curdling kind that stings your eyes. No, this is something gentler. Apple cider vinegar left to mellow in a sun-warmed jug. Amber-colored and slightly sweet, with a depth that only time and patience can produce. You tip a bit into your tea, stir it with the back of a spoon, and take a sip. Tart, yes, but grounding. This is the season of tonics. Every neighbor has a recipe. For coughs, for cold bones, for gloom. Yours is simple. Cider vinegar, honey, maybe a sprig of thyme. You don't claim it's magic, but you don't deny it either. The kitchen is full of jars now. Some hold sliced apples floating in golden liquid. Others contain muddled herbs steeping slowly into tinctures. You press the cloth lids down gently as if they were sleeping animals. Today you're making something new, a kind of apple salve meant to be rubbed on the temples when the soul gets heavy, according to Eliza. She gave you the recipe with a wink and half a warning. It only works if you hum while you stir. So you do. You hum softly, off-key, and somehow it feels right. You recall stories from town. People using apple poultices for swollen joints, boiled skins for fevers. Vinegar compresses for grief that clings to the ribs. One man claims his wife rubs vinegar on the soles of his feet when he can't sleep. Don't ask me how it works, he shrugs. It just does. Historians still argue whether colonial folk medicine was based on old European science or pure survival instinct. Frankly, it's probably both. You don't need proof, you just need results. And sometimes, results come in the form of someone sleeping through the night for the first time in weeks. You take your new salve to a neighbor whose child hasn't smiled in days. You leave it on their porch with a folded note. For heavy dreams. Use gently, you don't wait for thanks. Later, the child runs past your orchard, laughing. You don't ask. You just smile, stir your tea, and keep walking. You're beginning to see how deeply apples have worked their way into everything. Not just food and drink, but into care, comfort, even coping. They're no longer just fruit. They're tools, rituals, reminders. In your journal, you start a new page titled Apple Ways. You list everything you've learned. Slice thin, dry in sun, Tuss Dream Stabilizer, possible. Apple vinegar, plus chamomile. Weeping cure, unverified but promising. Warm cider and woolsock, for cold nights and colder thoughts. Some entries are practical, some are poetic. You don't separate the two anymore. Not everything has to be logical to be true. You walk through town and notice how many windows have apples on the sill. Not to ripen, just to be there. A soft presence. A quiet watch. You see them nestled into baskets, tucked into coat pockets, wrapped in cloth and gifted like treasures. One woman tells you she keeps an apple beside her bed. To remind me of spring, she says. You nod, because sometimes that's the whole cure. Remembering what's on the other side of the cold. You sit beneath a tree that's older than your orchard. A wild one. Gnarled. Unpredictable. Its apples taste strange. Bitter, then sweet, then bitter again. You eat one slowly anyway, like life. Complex. Not always pleasant, but real. You've learned that some apples never become cider. Some never get dried, sliced, or boiled. They fall, rot, feed the soil. That too is part of the cycle. Not every sadness gets cured. Some just return to the ground, making space for the next season's growth. You close your eyes, lean back against the trunk, and let the quiet hold you. The wind brushes your cheek like a lullaby. Somewhere far off, a crow calls. You smile. The orchard is listening, and it knows what to do. The trees are heavy this year. More apples than you expected. More than you remember planting for. The branches bend like old backs under wool coats, sagging with fruit so ripe it falls before your hand even reaches for it. You walk among them carefully, catching what you can before it bruises. The abundance feels suspicious, like the trees are trying to tell you something. Or maybe they're apologizing for last year for the quiet grief or whatever's coming next. You gather the fallen ones first, the soft ones, imperfect. Some have wormholes, others brown spots. You don't mind. These are the ones that taste real. They've lived, weathered storms, hit the dirt and got up anyway. These apples make the best cider. Everyone knows it. The bruised ones, the strange ones. The ones that no one reaches for at the market stall. They carry something extra, something stubborn and deep. You think about that when your neighbor's crop fails. A late frost burned his trees like careless words. He stops by your orchard with a hat in hand. Doesn't ask for much, just to sit. So you pour 2 mugs and say, "The trees were kind to me this year." You don't offer advice, just warmth. That night, the cider tastes different. Fuller. Like gratitude steeped in wood smoke. You start noticing stories people tell themselves when things go wrong. The tree knows what I need. The bitter ones are for days like this. If it falls right in front of you, it means something. You don't know if these are old beliefs or new inventions, but it doesn't matter. They serve a purpose. They give shape to the chaos. Historians still argue whether colonial folk culture created myths to cope with hardship, or whether hardship shaped the myths into being. You figure it goes both ways. After all, you've seen a man talk to a stump like it was his brother, and leave the conversation looking lighter. You remember the year the apples failed. Not just for you, for the whole town. The trees stood tall but bore nothing. Not a single bloom. Some blamed the soil, others the moon. You remember the silence that settled like dust. That was the ciderless winter. Fires burned colder. Songs sounded flatter. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt the missing sweetness. That year, sadness grew louder. It wasn't a sobbing kind of sadness, it was quiet, lingering, like a fog that makes you forget your way home. People stayed indoors more, arguments flared quicker. Laughter took longer to show up. You tried making tea from dried apple skins. It didn't taste the same. But you drank it anyway. Rituals matter most when their magic falters. When the blossoms returned the next spring, people wept. Some privately, some in the open. You saw one old man hug a branch, just hugged it. No words. That's how you knew it wasn't just about food or drink. The orchard had become something else. A kind of hope, maybe. Or a living memory of better days. You now walk among your trees with a new reverence. When you pick the fruit, you thank the tree. Not out loud, but inside. Where it counts. You start naming them too. Not all, just the old ones. The stubborn ones. The ones that bloom even after lightning strikes. You pass one such tree today. Scarred, half hollow, leaning hard toward the sun. You run your hand down its trunk. Still standing, you whisper. It says nothing, of course, but the wind stirs its leaves in a way that feels like it's listening. Like you carry your basket back to the house. Inside are apples bruised, blotched, misshapen, but beautiful. The kind sadness makes space for. The first time you meet her, she's standing in the middle of your orchard with her hand on a tree like she's holding a secret. She doesn't ask permission, just looks around slowly, eyes half shut, like she's listening to something you can't hear. This one's still angry, she says quietly, patting the bark. You prune it too early. You don't argue, because there's something in her tone that makes you think she's not guessing. And because, truth be told, you did prune it early, back in spring. Out of impatience more than strategy. Her name is Mercy. Fitting, really. She lives alone on the edge of the woods in a cottage that smells of herbs, wood smoke, and slightly singed honey. Children are told not to go there. Adults don't say why. You've heard the rumors that she talks to bees, that her cider can mend a broken heart, that she once turned a man's sadness into a tree that still hasn't bloomed. You suspect most of it is nonsense, but she does know apples. She tells you to bury crushed blossoms beneath your porch. Keeps nightmares from curling up under the floorboard. You do it. Not because you believe, but because she says it gently. Like she's handing you a little piece of pie, and you're tired of saying no. Over time, Mercy becomes part of your rhythm. She visits in odd hours, dawn, dusk, the hours when light is slippery. She never stays long, but she leaves things. Dried leaves in paper packets, jars of apple cordial, a braid of grass tied around a stick. You stop questioning, you just place them on your shelf. One day she shows you a pouch of tiny apple seeds. Not from your orchard. Wild ones, she says. Found near the mountain stream where the fog never leaves. These are for sorrow, she whispers, pressing them into your hand. Plant them when you can't cry. You don't know what that means until you do. Historians still argue whether women like Mercy were midwives, healers, or just lonely souls with too much knowledge and too little power. Some called them witches, others called them necessary. You just call her neighbor. The town, of course, has opinions. One man mutters that she makes people feel too much. Another says she cures things that shouldn't be cured. But when his wife stops speaking for a week after a miscarriage, it's Mercy he walks to. And it's Mercy who walks back with him, arms full of dried blossoms and quiet instructions. You begin to notice how many women around here have apple lore tucked into their aprons. One ties apple bark into the hem of her dress for protection. Another teaches her daughters to write worries on apple cores and bury them under new saplings. There's a rhythm to it. A passing down. Soft rituals wrapped in daily tasks. Boil this. Burn that. Whisper this before sleep. It's not magic exactly, it's muscle memory. From generations of women who knew sorrow couldn't be erased but could be softened. You add some of their wisdom to your journal, carefully, respectfully. You title the page Apple Wives and Orchard Wards. You sketch a small blossom in the corner. You ask Mercy once why she does it, why she cares. She smiles and presses a dried apple slice into your palm. Because grief likes to hide, she says, but apples find it. Bring it into the light. You plant her seeds near the edge of your orchard. The ground is cold that day, reluctant, but you whisper to the earth as you dig. These are for sorrow, you say. The wind answers by stilling, just for a second, like it's listening. You water the seeds with cider, just a splash, just enough to let them know they're wanted. Then you wait. You tend the trees with a slowness you never used to have. There's something different about how you move now. Less rushed, more careful, like every branch is a conversation you're still having. You know which tree leans too far after storms, which one holds onto its leaves a little longer than the others, and which one, an old crooked fellow near the fence, only bears fruit every other year but does it with such stubborn joy that you forgive it instantly. You've come to realize something over these years. The orchard mirrors the people who care for it. And lately you've noticed how the orchard keepers, like the trees, carry a particular kind of sadness. Not loud, not tragic, just present, as if rooted deep in the bones. You see it in their shoulders, in the way they stand too long looking at nothing. The same way you catch yourself doing. You talk to them, quietly, over mugs, while trimming branches or hauling baskets. They speak slowly, if at all. Some won't even say the word sadness. They talk about being low, tired in the spirit, or just nod when you ask how they are and mutter, "Still here. Still here." That's something. You start offering your cider not just as a drink, but as an invitation. A way to pause, a way to let the stillness stretch long enough for someone to breathe. You keep a second cup on hand now, always. One man brings you a bushel of apples without speaking. Just sets it down and nods. You invite him in. He stays for hours watching the fire. When he finally speaks, it's just a whisper. Don't know what to do with all this quiet inside me. You hand him a warm mug. You don't need to say anything. Historians still debate whether colonial orchards served primarily economic or emotional roles. You could argue both, but you'd argue harder for the emotional. Because when the harvest came, what mattered wasn't just the quantity. It was the moment of standing in a field and feeling like you made something live. That counts for something. You keep seeing small gestures, quiet rituals the orchard keepers use to hold themselves together. One woman knots apple stems into bracelets. Another sings to her trees at dusk. You think they're trying to offer something in return. Gratitude, maybe. Or a plea to keep going. You find yourself humming as you walk the rows. Not a tune you know, just something soft and circling. The trees seem to lean into the sound. You like to believe they're listening. Or maybe it's you listening to yourself for the first time in days. You visit your oldest tree, the one that leans. You lean too, your shoulder pressed against its trunk like a friend. You whisper, "Still here." It creaks softly in the wind. You imagine it's answering, and me too. Sometimes the orchard is the only place where sadness feels welcome. Not because it's wanted, but because it isn't judged. The trees don't flinch. They don't look away. They just stand, breathe, grow. You begin to think that maybe that's the lesson. That sadness isn't something to run from or cure like a fever. It's something to carry. Water, prune gently. Give sunlight like a crooked apple tree. Still bearing fruit, still part of the orchard. You sip from your mug, leaning back on the fence post as dusk stretches across the sky like spilled cider. The trees cast long shadows. The wind hums. And you know that for now, this is enough. You're woken by footsteps on the gravel. Not hurried, not sneaky. Just the kind of footsteps made by someone who isn't sure whether they should be here, but came anyway. You open the door to find a boy, no older than 15, carrying a sloshing jug and a note tied around its neck. For the cause, it reads. You smile, motion him inside, and set the jug next to the others. The rebellion has begun, quietly, politely, and with a surprising number of apples involved. You weren't expecting the orchard to be political, but here it is. It starts with whispers in the village, then posters nailed crookedly to trees, then cider jugs being passed not to neighbors, but to men with maps. They say it's for trade, but you know better. You've seen the look in their eyes, determined, tired, angry in the quiet way only oppressed people can be. Revolution is brewing, and apparently it tastes like fermented apples. You're told that cider is safer than ale for long marches, lighter to carry, and besides, there's symbolism to it. Something about growing your own liberty and drinking it too. You don't know if that's a speech someone gave or if it just feels right. Either way, you pour another jug. At night, you hear stories. How a barrel of cider smuggled under a hay cart got past redcoats. How a spy used an apple tree as a dead drop. How some soldiers believe drinking orchard cider before battle brings luck. You're not sure you believe in luck, but you do believe in ritual. Historians still argue whether cider truly fueled the revolution or whether it was just common. But you've handed a jug to a man with powder on his coat and fear in his eyes, and watched his shoulders drop just a little after the first sip. That's something. You don't fight. Not with weapons. But you fight in your own way. You keep pressing. Keep bottling. Keep handing over the jugs without asking too many questions. You press harder during the long months. Use up more of your stores than you should. But you never stop. And the orchard never complains. You find yourself thinking differently about the trees now. Not just as comfort, but as resistance. They're quiet, but unshakable. They grow where they're planted. They feed people without demanding anything but time. You admire that. There's a small ceremony one evening. No fanfare. Just 6 men, 1 woman, and a map spread over a cider barrel. You pour mugs for each of them. They raise them, not in a toast, but in something softer. A silent promise. You raise yours too. Later you sit beneath a tree that once gave you your sourest fruit. This year it's sweetened. You wonder what changed. Soil? Rain? Or maybe it just decided to try a little harder. You lean against its trunk and think about all the different kinds of bravery. Yours may never make it into songs, but it shows up in every jug that travels down the road in a wooden cart. You tie a red ribbon around one of the branches, a quiet signal to a friend in the hills. You never planned to be part of this, but here you are, still here. The doctor comes to town again, wearing new boots and a new theory. This time, it's the soul. He stands in the middle of the green, coat unbuttoned, gesturing with one hand while the other clutches a long stick. He insists on calling a pointer. He uses it to draw invisible diagrams in the air, humors, spirits, subtle airs. You try not to smile, it's all so serious. He speaks of melancholy as if it's a fog in the blood. He recommends bleeding, mustard plasters, walking backward during the new moon. Someone coughs politely. You sip cider. Then he says something that makes the orchard keepers lean in. Apples, he declares, are gently purgative. Excellent for regulating mood, the bowels, and the darker passions. You nearly spit out your drink, but you nod like you agree. He prescribes stewed apples, apple wine, and vinegar foot baths. One woman asks if she can skip the foot part. No, he says sternly. That's where the sadness leaks out. Historians still debate whether early colonial medicine was based on science or showmanship. You think it was probably both, somewhere between trial and error and dramatic storytelling. But people follow the doctor's orders because people are tired and desperate for order. And because, well, apples are at least familiar. You try the stewed apple recipe that evening. Add cinnamon and cloves because your grandmother once told you. If it smells like home, it heals better. You eat slowly, watching the steam curl like a ghost above the bowl. The truth is, everyone's trying something. One man takes to carrying a raw apple in his coat pocket at all times. For the nerves, he says, tapping it like a lucky stone. Another swears by slicing apples and laying them on his windowsill at night, to catch the bad thoughts before they reach me. You find these rituals oddly touching, maybe even brave. They're not trying to conquer sadness, just live beside it. Make it a little more bearable. Your journal grows thicker. You title a new section, Soul Apples, Treatments. Real or imagined, you log everything. Raw apple before sunrise. Improved mood, unconfirmed. Apple vinegar and bathwater. Mixed results. Whispering to tree during rainstorm. Emotionally clarifying, but possibly just wet. You visit a neighbor who's taken to sleeping in his orchard. Says the trees keep his dreams in check. You bring him cider and a blanket. He points to the branches above. They watch. They remember. You lie beside him a while. Let the quiet hold you both. That night, you have a dream where an apple tree speaks. Not with words, but with images. A jug, a falling leaf, the sound of a heartbeat. You wake up calmer, less tangled. The orchard is thick with memory now. Every row, every branch seems to hold a story. You walk through them like a library. Each tree a book, some still being written. Some healing, some haunted, and some, like the one by the creek, just peaceful. You sit there often. Don't say much, don't need to. The doctor leaves town a week later, takes his stick, his diagrams, and his mustard plasters with him. But the apples stay. And they keep doing what they've always done. Show up. Grow. Offer sweetness quietly. You take another bite of stewed apple and smile, it still works. The cities smell different. You notice it the second your cart rattles down the cobblestones. No longer the scent of tilled soil or firewood, but soot, sweat, fish, and something you decide not to name. You've brought apples with you, baskets lined with cloth, cider sealed in corked jugs. They clink together softly like nervous conversation. The market square is loud. You haven't heard this many voices in months. People jostle past each other with purpose. No nods, no hellos, just movement. You feel like a goat that wandered into a dance hall. You set up your stall in the quietest corner you can find, right near a shuttered bakery and a woman who sells buttons. She eyes your apples with suspicion. Out-of-towners don't sell well, she says, not unkindly. City folks want shine. Yours are honest. You thank her. She doesn't laugh. Your apples sit in baskets like patient dogs. Not perfect. Blotched, dimpled, freckled. But they smell like trees. You uncork a jug and let the scent drift. A few heads turn, then slowly people begin to approach. They don't ask about the cider. They ask about the orchard, about the trees, about where you're from. You answer gently, letting the words stretch. You describe your land, the mist in the mornings. The way the trees lean toward the sun like children to a story. And somewhere in that telling, you notice their shoulders lower. A woman buys 6 apples and says, "My husband hasn't smiled in weeks." You hand her a 7th. "That one's for him." A man tastes the cider and blinks like he's just woken from a long sleep. "What's in this?" he asks. You say, "Just apples and thyme." He nods. "Thyme, huh?" Then buys 2 jugs. Historians still wonder why urban centers clung so tightly to rural nostalgia. Why city dwellers longed for fields they'd never seen. But you see it clearly. Out here, everything's sharp and fast. The apples remind people that things can still be soft. You pass an alley where a boy's playing with a stick and a tin cup. You toss him an apple. He misses but laughs anyway. A moment later, he bites into it and grins with juice on his chin. You pretend not to watch. The cider sells slowly but steadily. No one rushes. It's not a drink for rushing. A few ask if you'll be back. You say, if the trees allow. You walk the city streets that night, a few apples still in your bag. You place one on a doorstep, one on a windowsill where someone's crying behind the curtain, one on a bench where an old man rests with his eyes closed. You don't know if anyone will notice, but the gesture feels right. Apples don't shout. They wait. When you return home, the orchard looks smaller somehow. Or maybe it's just that the city made you bigger. Either way, the trees seem pleased. A breeze rustles through the leaves like applause. You sit at your porch and pour yourself a mug. It tastes the same and different. You realize something. Apples don't just carry sweetness, they carry memory of places, of people, of comfort passed hand to hand, word to word, until it lives in more than just the tongue. And as the stars rise over the orchard, you feel it too. The stillness that follows giving. You're not surprised when the scientists arrive. 2 of them, city men in tidy coats, clipboards in hand, eyes that scan your orchard like it's a crime scene. One mutters something about sugar levels. The other mumbles about serotonin precursors. You stand at the edge of the trees, arms folded, letting them poke and prod your peace. They've come to study melancholy, or more precisely to quantify it, measure the shape of sadness, bottle it, explain it away with diagrams and glandular maps, and yes, something to do with apples. You invite them in, offer cider. They accept, reluctantly. One sips and raises an eyebrow. Unusual notes, he says. Fermented emotion, you reply. He doesn't laugh. They ask questions about why people associate apples with calm, about whether you've noticed behavioral changes during harvest. You nod and tell them, people talk more when they're peeling apples. Cry less when they stir cider. They scribble that down. They bring strange tools. Glass tubes, weights, even a skull, though you don't ask whose. One sets up in your barn. The other sits cross-legged beneath a tree, waiting for it to speak chemically. You figure he'll be waiting a while. One night, you find them arguing, not loudly, just back and forth like 2 birds competing for the same branch. One believes sadness is rooted in the gut. The other says it's in the blood. Neither considers the possibility that it's in the air, in the orchard, in the way the wind holds your name some mornings. Historians still debate when the shift happened, when grief stopped being a spiritual shadow and became a medical diagnosis. You're watching it happen in real time, and you're not sure how you feel about it. You walk them through your trees, show them where Mercy's wild apples grow, tell them about the seed meant for sorrow. They nod, jot notes, and take samples like something sacred can be measured in milliliters. You want to be annoyed, but instead you feel something softer. Pity, maybe. Or understanding. They're trying to help in the only way they know how. Just like the woman who sings to her cider. Just like the boy who buries apple cores beside his bed. Everyone wants to help the sadness sit down. One of them asks if he can take a small branch. For analysis. You nod, but ask him to leave a coin at its base. To say thank you, you explain. He hesitates, then places a silver button beneath the roots. Progress. When they leave, the orchard feels quieter. Not in mourning, just tired. Like a guest has finally gone home and the house can exhale again. You sit beneath your favorite tree, the old one by the bend, and think about all the explanations people try to give sadness. The way they name it, frame it, chase it like it's something to be solved. You sip your cider and whisper, maybe it just wants to be witnessed. The tree creaks in agreement. Or maybe that's just the wind. You pick up a fallen apple. It's small, mottled, deeply fragrant. You bite in and it tastes like memory. Not joy, not pain. Just the quiet middle space where both sit and nod at each other. You close your eyes, lean back, and let the orchard carry you. The tree from Mercy's seeds is blooming for the first time. You almost miss it. Just a curl of white at first, tucked deep in the branches. Then another and another. Not the bold, showy kind of blossom. These are quiet, cream pale and shy. You crouch beside them like you're listening to a secret, and in a way you are. It's been years. You planted those seeds not expecting fruit. Not really. They were a gesture, a whisper into the earth. And now here they are, blooming like grief, finally exhaling. You press your hand against the bark. It's cool, steady, somehow younger than the others, and yet already carrying something ancient in its limbs. You think about what Mercy said. Plant them when you can't cry. You didn't understand it then, but you do now. You've cried since. Not often. But when it comes, it's clean. Not the storm kind. Just soft rain. The kind that leaves the orchard greener the next day. You start spending more time near this tree. Bring your cider mug, your journal, the letters you've never mailed. You sit under it like it's someone you trust. You hum occasionally. It doesn't answer, but you no longer need it to. The townsfolk come and go. Some just to walk among the trees. Others to ask for cider or a quiet place to think. You don't speak much anymore, just gesture toward a row, offer a jug, or place a hand on a shoulder. The trees do most of the talking now. You catch a child tying ribbons on branches. One for her mother, one for her dog, one she won't explain. You don't ask. She hands you a ribbon too. For something you miss, she says. You tie it on the mercy tree and walk away before the ache has time to fully arrive. Historians still argue whether apples ever truly cured sadness, whether the cider soothed or simply softened, whether it was chemistry, community, or coincidence. You've stopped wondering, because now you know it's not about curing anything. It's about carrying it, like an orchard does with its own crooked trees. Like you've done with those strange, speckled apples that nobody else wanted but turned out to be the sweetest of all. You walk the rows slowly, boots scuffing the dirt. The trees sway gently in the wind, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers across your path. Each one knows your name, not because you told them, but because you stayed. You reach your porch and sit with your mug. The cider's cool now, less sharp, almost tender. You sip and listen as the night exhales around you, and just as the last bit of sun tips below the horizon, you whisper to no one in particular, they were right to believe. So now the orchard rests. The branches hang still in the dark, leaves rustling only when the breeze decides to pass through slowly. The apples, those you picked, those you left, have softened into the soil, leaving their sweetness behind. It lingers not as taste or memory, but as something quieter. The moon hangs above the trees like a watchful lantern, pale and patient. A few fireflies blink across the grass. Somewhere in the distance an owl stirs, but even it doesn't speak tonight. Your mug is nearly empty, but your hands are warm. And the orchard hums, not in sound but in presence. You feel it in your chest, in your breath, in the long, quiet space between thoughts. There's no rush now. The sadness can sleep too. You close your eyes, feeling the rhythm of the trees, of the land, of the stillness that comes when nothing is demanded of you. No fixing, no proving. Just being. Let your shoulders drop. Let your brow soften. Let the last bit of story settle into your bones like warm cider. You are safe here. The night is kind and the trees are still listening. So sleep now, softly. Sleep like an apple falls. End of script. Sweet dreams.